My brother stole $5,000 from me while I was passed out on his couch, then swapped my credit card and made me breakfast like nothing happened. When I confronted him, he laughed and said, "You should have known better. I'm your brother, not your friend." I hung up. That was 8 days ago. This morning, he texted me 14 times and said he can't sleep anymore. I never got along with my brother because ever since day one, he made it his personal goal to ruin my life like he was Reverse Flash. My brother immediately saw that being the younger brother had made our parents believed in him more than me, so he started lying about me. He always do things, for example, beating himself up, and then tell our parents that his older sibling, aka me, had caused the bruises. I of course would get in trouble while he gets ice cream as some sort of compensation, until he turned 18 and began asking me for money. A lot of money. It went from me ordering him takeout once a week to every day, to him demanding a $500 weekly allowance. I had a good job and could afford this, but I didn't want to. Getting money handed to him wouldn't serve him in the long run. I told him so, and to my surprise, he accepted my response. Fast forward to next week when he came over to hang out. It was all smiles and laughs, until the next morning when $250 was missing from my wallet. At first I didn't want to believe it, but when I checked my nanny cams, I saw him sneak into my room while I was sleeping. To my horror, he took not only the money, but he went through my drawers and took my wife's gold necklace too. I immediately called him, demanding he gives everything back. I will call the police if he doesn't, and if he ever does anything like that again, I will cut him off. He tried to deny he did it at first, but he soon gave in. He apologized and promised to never try anything again. But as I'm sure you can guess, he did not stick to his word. A few months later, it was my daughter's first birthday. At some point, I went upstairs to get the camera for photos, when I saw him ripping open and going through the envelopes my friends and family gave to us. He was taking all the cash out of them and stuffing them in his pocket. I snapped my fingers, and when he saw me, he froze. But he didn't apologize. Instead, he started begging me to let him keep the money, and when I told him no, he got mad. He punched my daughter's pram and hurt his hand in the process. I was forced to kick him out and proceeded to send him a super angry text that same day telling him I'm going no contact. I almost felt guilty, because family is family, but then a week later his girlfriend broke up with him because of the incident. And when he called me to blame me for her breaking up with him, I realized I made the right choice. My life went on without him, and for the next 3 years everything was great. I was even able to put a down payment on a house because I had the money ever since I stopped giving him so much. But then a few months ago, he reached out. He said he saw my Facebook post about the down payment and asked why I never told him. I didn't want to respond, but I gave him the courtesy and reminded him of everything. Surprisingly, he apologized. He said he wants to make things right and invited me for lunch. I was apprehensive, but reluctantly agreed. We had a pleasant catch-up, but the fact he kept talking about money problems and how he could use some told me he still saw me as a cash cow. Despite this, he was apologetic, and I told him that as long as he never did anything shady or asked for a dime again, I'd let him back in my life. He was ecstatic, overjoyed. He caused a whole scene. He was that happy. Looking back, there was definitely an ulterior motive there. Still, the first month after was perfectly fine. We sometimes spoke, went to an all-you-can-eat buffet once, and were slowly rebuilding a relationship. But then last week I went out to a bar with him, and that's when I realized letting him back into my life was the biggest mistake I ever made. We were talking, drinking, and as the night progressed, he bought me more and more shots. And I mean, who am I to turn down free alcohol? My wife knew I was staying at his place too, so I could let loose. We made our way back to his around 3 a.m. I was way more hammered than him, and as soon as we got in, I just passed out on his couch. I woke up at 9 to him making breakfast and offering to call me a cab home. He had never been this kind towards me. I should have known something was up. However, my critical thinking had been replaced with hangover symptoms, so I just ate and got in the cab. But then while in the cab, I realized something. I'd forgotten to check if I had my wallet. I quickly patted myself down, and thankfully I had it, but then I opened it. At first, everything seemed fine, but my credit card looked a little odd. I took it out, and that's when horror washed upon my face. My brother had swapped out my credit card for his old expired one. I panicked. I immediately went onto my bank account, where I saw that I already had $5,000 less than last night. To make matters worse, right as I was checking, I saw a notification appear. $2,300 withdrawal from ATM. Was this you? I wasted no time calling my bank to block my card, but then, as luck would have it, as my phone was ringing, it ran out of battery and died. So there I was, hungover, driving home, minutes away from having my bank account cleared out and no way to stop it. I told the driver to take me to the nearest phone store instead of home. My hands were shaking as I rushed inside and begged them to let me use their phone. The employee must have seen the panic on my face because he handed me the display model without asking questions. I dialed my bank's emergency number from memory, my fingers fumbling over the numbers twice before getting it right. The automated system felt like it took forever. Press 1 for this, press 2 for that. Meanwhile, my brother was probably hitting every ATM in the city. Finally, I got through to a real person and practically shouted my account number at them. They put an immediate freeze on everything, but the damage was already done. $7,300. Gone. I slumped against the counter feeling sick. The employee asked if I needed to sit down, but I just thanked him and stumbled back to the waiting taxi. During the ride home, I kept checking my phone, willing it to somehow charge itself. My mind raced through what my brother might have done with my card. ATM withdrawals had daily limits, so he must have made purchases too. Electronics maybe, things he could resell quickly. When I finally got home, my wife took one look at my face and knew something was wrong. I plugged in my phone and showed her the bank notifications as they loaded. Her expression went from concern to fury as she scrolled through transaction after transaction. There were ATM withdrawals from 3 different machines, maxing out the daily limit. Then purchases at an electronics store, a jewelry shop, and even a car rental place. She grabbed her laptop and we logged into my account together. The full picture was even worse than I'd thought. My brother had been methodical. He'd started with small test purchases around 4 a.m., probably checking if the card worked. Then he'd escalated quickly, hitting multiple ATMs before stores opened. The jewelry store transaction was for $3,000. The electronics store showed 2 separate purchases totaling $4,000. The car rental was a deposit for a luxury vehicle. I called the bank again from my charged phone, this time to dispute the charges. They said they'd investigate, but it could take weeks to get my money back. Weeks. I had bills due, mortgage payments, groceries to buy. My emergency fund was in a different account, thank God. But this was still devastating. My wife started making a list of everything we needed to do. File a police report, contact the stores where purchases were made, check if any of our other accounts were compromised. She was being practical while I sat there in shock. My own brother had planned this. The whole reconciliation had been a setup. I thought about that night at the bar differently now. How he'd kept buying me shots, encouraging me to drink more. How he'd insisted I crash at his place instead of taking a cab home earlier. Even the breakfast and cab in the morning were part of it, keeping me distracted while he used my card. The police station was our next stop. The officer who took my report seemed sympathetic, but not optimistic. Family theft cases were complicated, he explained. Since I'd voluntarily gone to my brother's place and had been drinking, it would be hard to prove I hadn't given him permission to use the card. I showed him my bank statements, the pattern of transactions, but he just shook his head. Without video evidence or witnesses, it was my word against my brother's. We drove to the electronics store next. The manager pulled up the security footage, and there he was. My brother, using my card at 8:47 a.m., buying 2 laptops and a high-end camera. media. The manager said they couldn't do anything since the transaction had been approved. The items were gone, probably already sold online. The jewelry store was the same story. My brother had bought gold chains and watches, easy items to fence. The staff remembered him because he'd been in such a hurry, barely looking at what he was buying, just pointing at the most expensive items in the case. At the car rental place, we got lucky, sort of. My brother had rented a BMW for a week, putting down a $1,000 deposit, but he'd used his own driver's license, which meant we had proof he was involved. The rental agent said the car was due back in 5 days. If it wasn't returned, they'd report it stolen and charge the full value to my card. My wife drove us home while I called my brother. No answer. I tried again. Nothing. His phone went straight to voicemail. I left a message trying to keep my voice steady. Told him I knew what he'd done, that he had 24 hours to return everything or I'd press charges. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept running the numbers in my head. I wonder why the brother picked such an elaborate scheme with the credit card swap instead of just taking cash from the wallet like before. There's something oddly calculated about getting him drunk first, then making breakfast and calling a cab. Almost like he. $7,300. Plus the potential cost of the rental car if he didn't return it. Plus whatever else he might try before the card was fully blocked. My wife found me at 3 a.m., sitting at the kitchen table with my laptop, going through 3 years of bank statements. She made coffee and sat with me. We discovered this wasn't the first time. Small amounts here and there, always after we'd hung out. $20 from an ATM, $50 at a gas station. Times when I'd thought I'd misplaced cash or forgotten about a purchase. The pattern went back months. The next morning, I called in sick to work. I couldn't focus on anything except getting my money back. My wife suggested we drive to my brother's apartment, confront him in person. Part of me wanted to, but I knew it wouldn't end well. I was too angry. Instead, I started documenting everything. Screenshots of bank statements, the police report number, photos of the security footage from the stores. My phone rang around noon. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. It was my brother, calling from someone else's phone. He sounded different, nervous. He asked if we could meet, said he could explain everything. I told him the only place I'd meet him was at the police station. He hung up. An hour later, my mom called. My brother had shown up at her house, telling her some story about how I'd promised to lend him money and was now backing out. She believed him. Of course she did, just like when we were kids. I tried explaining what really happened, but she kept interrupting, saying I'd always been jealous of him. That family should help family. I sent her screenshots of my bank statement, the police report. She went quiet for a long moment, then said there must be some misunderstanding. Maybe I'd been too hammered to remember giving him permission. I hung up on her. My wife took my phone away after that, said I needed a break from family drama. That evening we went to my brother's apartment building. His car wasn't in its usual spot. The rental BMW wasn't there either. I convinced the building manager to let us check if he was home, claiming a family emergency. No answer at his door. The manager said he hadn't seen my brother in 2 days. We sat in our car outside for an hour, waiting. Nothing. My wife suggested we check his social media. His Facebook had been updated that morning. A post about new beginnings with a photo of a sunrise. The location tag showed a city 3 hours away. The comments were from people I didn't recognize, congratulating him on his new job opportunity. I scrolled through his recent posts. Photos of expensive dinners, new clothes, concert tickets, all posted in the last week, all paid for with my money. The anger I felt was beyond anything I'd experienced before. This wasn't just theft. It was betrayal calculated over months, maybe years. My wife drove us home while I called the bank again. They'd started the investigation, but warned it could take up to 60 days for a resolution. 60 days. Meanwhile, my brother was living it up in another city with my money. I thought about driving there, confronting him, but my wife talked me out of it. We needed to be smart about this. That night, I went through everything again. Every interaction we'd had since reconnecting. Every conversation about money. Every time he'd steered things toward his financial problems. The patterns were so clear now. How had I missed them? How had I been so stupid? The next few days blurred together. I went to work, but couldn't concentrate. My boss noticed and asked if everything was okay. I gave some vague answer about family issues. At home, I obsessed over finding my brother. I checked his social media constantly, called his old friends, even reached out to his ex-girlfriend. She actually called me back. Turns out my brother had stolen from her too. Not her credit card, but cash from her apartment. Jewelry her grandmother had left her. She'd never reported it because she'd loved him, thought he'd change. We compared notes, and the similarities were striking. The way he'd gained trust, the careful planning, the sudden disappearance. She mentioned something interesting. My brother had talked about a friend in that other city who'd offered him work, cash jobs, off the books. She didn't know details, but remembered the friend's first name. It wasn't much, but it was something. I spent hours searching social media with just a first name and city, found dozens of profiles, started cross-referencing with my brother's friends list, finally found a match. A guy who'd commented on several of my brother's old posts. His profile was mostly private, but his work information was visible. A construction company. I called the company, pretending to be verifying employment for a rental application. The receptionist confirmed someone matching my brother's description had started working there recently. Paid daily in cash. I had found him. My wife and I discussed what to do next. The police had basically said they couldn't help without more evidence. The bank investigation was ongoing, but now I knew where he was. The temptation to drive there was overwhelming. To confront him at his job, make him pay back what he'd stolen. But my wife was right. We needed to be smarter than that. If I showed up angry, he'd run again. Or worse, spin some story to his new coworkers about his crazy brother harassing him. We needed a plan. A way to get my money back without giving him another chance to disappear. I started researching the construction company, found reviews mentioning they were strict about their workers' legal status, required background checks for permanent positions. My brother was working cash jobs now, but if he wanted steady employment, he'd need to go through their screening process. That gave me an idea. I couldn't force my brother to pay me back, but I could make staying hidden very uncomfortable for him. I started documenting everything in a neat package. The police report, bank statements, security footage stills, a timeline of the theft. Even included the testimony from his ex-girlfriend about past thefts. I didn't send it to the construction company. Not yet. Instead, I created a simple website. Nothing fancy, just a clear presentation of facts. What my brother had done. The evidence. A counter showing how many days he'd been hiding with my money. I made sure it would show up if anyone Googled his name. Then I waited. Let him think he'd gotten away with it. Let him settle into his new life. Get comfortable. Maybe even start thinking about making that cash job permanent. Because I knew my brother. He couldn't resist bragging, posting about his new life. And eventually, someone would Google him. A potential employer. A new girlfriend. Someone. My wife thought I was being too patient. Part of me agreed. Every day that passed was another day without my money. Another day of him enjoying what he'd stolen. But I'd learned something important. My brother was a planner, but only for the short term. He thought 3 moves ahead, but not 30. He'd planned the theft perfectly, but hadn't thought about what came after. A week passed. The bank investigation continued. They'd recovered some money from the car rental when my brother actually returned the BMW. Probably needed to stay mobile. But that still left me thousands in the hole. I kept checking his social media, the website analytics, waiting for something to change. Then I got a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. It was my brother's new boss. He'd Googled my brother's name after he'd applied for a permanent position, found my website, wanted to know if the information was accurate. I told him everything. The theft, the pattern of behavior, the current police investigation conversation. He listened quietly, then thanked me for the information, said they had a strict policy about employing people with pending criminal matters. I heard my brother's voice in the background, asking what was going on. Then the line went dead. My brother called an hour later, furious, screaming about how I'd ruined his fresh start, how I was destroying his life over money. I stayed calm, told him he'd destroyed his own life the moment he'd stolen from me. He could fix it by returning what he'd taken. He hung up on me. That night, he started texting. First angry messages, then bargaining. He'd pay me back half if I took down the website. When I didn't respond, the messages turned pleading. He needed this job, had nowhere else to go. I felt a twinge of the old guilt, but my wife reminded me of the morning I discovered the theft, the panic, the violation of trust. I texted back once, full amount, within 1 week, or the website stays up forever. He didn't respond. The silence stretched for 3 days. My wife kept reminding me to eat, to sleep, to go to work. I went through the motions, but my mind stayed fixed on that website counter ticking upward. 4 days since the theft, 5 days, 6. On the 7th day, my phone buzzed during a meeting. Unknown number again. I excused myself and stepped into the hallway. My brother's voice came through, different this time, desperate. He explained he'd lost the construction job. Word had spread about the website. He'd tried applying elsewhere, but every employer Googled him. The stolen money was almost gone. He'd blown most of it on hotel rooms, restaurants, trying to maintain appearances while job hunting. I listened without interrupting. When he finished, I reminded him of my terms. Full repayment within a week. The deadline had passed. The website would stay up indefinitely. He broke down then. Not the fake tears from our childhood, but something rawer. He admitted he'd developed a gambling problem. Online poker, sports betting, cryptocurrency trading. The losses had spiraled. He'd borrowed from dangerous people. Oh wow, the brother was stealing small amounts for months before the big theft? That's so sneaky and planned out. What made him suddenly go from taking $20 here and there to $7,000 all at once? The theft from me was supposed to buy him time. My wife watched from the doorway as I processed this information. Part of me wanted to help. The other part remembered waking up in that taxi, discovering the betrayal. I told him the website stays up until every penny is returned. He hung up. That evening, my wife and I reviewed our finances. The missing $7,000 had forced us to dip into savings for bills. We'd postponed car repairs, canceled a planned vacation. The ripple effects touched everything. My phone lit up with a text from an unknown number. A photo of my brother, face swollen, lip split. The message read that he owed them $15,000. They'd found him through my website. They wanted their money, and they knew he had family. My hands shook as I showed my wife. She immediately started packing a bag, insisting we stay elsewhere for a few nights. I wanted to argue, to say this wasn't our problem, but the fear in her eyes stopped me. We drove to her sister's house 2 towns over. The next morning brought another text. This time, a photo of our house. They'd been watching. They knew where we lived. The message was clear. Pay your brother's debts, or deal with the consequences. My wife's sister, Victoria, worked at a bank. She helped us understand our options. We could ignore the threats, hope they were bluffs. We could pay and hope they'd leave us alone. Or we could find another solution. I chose option 3. I called my brother, told him about the threats. He swore he hadn't sent them after us, that they'd found him on their own. I didn't care about his excuses anymore. I gave him 48 hours to fix this mess, or I'd make his life even more difficult. My next call was to his ex-girlfriend. She'd mentioned other victims. Together, we started reaching out. Found 3 more people he'd stolen from over the years. A former roommate missing rent money. A coworker whose laptop disappeared. An old friend who'd lent him $2,000 for a fake emergency. We created a group chat, sharing our stories. The patterns were identical. The trust-building phase, the calculated betrayal, the disappearing act. Between us, he'd stolen nearly $20,000. One of the victims, Benji, was a paralegal. He explained that individually, our cases were weak, but together, we might have something. He started drafting a document outlining the pattern of theft. Not for court, but for leverage. Meanwhile, the threats escalated. Photos of my wife's car at her workplace. A message saying they knew our routines. My brother called, panicking. They'd found him again. Struck him worse this time. He begged me to pay them, promised he'd pay me back double. I hung up and called the police. Explained the situation. Showed them the threatening messages. They took a report, but said without concrete evidence of a crime, their hands were tied. They suggested we vary our routines. Maybe install security cameras. That night, unable to sleep at Victoria's house, I had an idea. These people wanted their money. My brother had spent mine. But what if there was another way to make them whole? I messaged the group chat. What if we flipped the script? Instead of hiding from my brother's creditors, what if we helped them find justice? Not through violence, but through the same methods my brother used on us. The next morning, I received a call from a blocked number. The voice was calm, professional. They introduced themselves as someone my brother owed money to. They'd seen my website, appreciated the documentation. They proposed a meeting. My wife begged me not to go, but something in the caller's tone suggested business, not violence. I agreed to meet in a public place, a busy coffee shop downtown. The man who showed up looked like an accountant, not a thug. He explained he ran a legitimate lending service. My brother had borrowed $5,000, agreed to standard terms, then vanished when payment came due. The interest had ballooned the debt. I showed him our group's documentation. 5 victims, $20,000 stolen. He nodded, understanding the pattern. Then he made an unexpected offer. He'd forgive my brother's debt if we helped him recover losses from other defaulters who'd disappeared. I declined immediately. I wasn't becoming a debt collector, but his next words stopped me. He didn't want us to collect anything. He wanted us to share our methods, the website idea, the documentation system, the network of victims. He saw it as a more effective way to pressure defaulters than traditional methods. After he left, I sat in my car thinking. My brother's choices had created a web of consequences. His creditors were victims too, in their own way. But I couldn't shake the feeling that helping them would cross a line. That evening, my brother showed up at Victoria's house. I don't know how he found us. He looked terrible. 2 black eyes, walking with a limp. He collapsed on the porch, begging for help. Victoria wanted to call an ambulance. My wife wanted to call the police. I stood there, frozen by indecision. This was still my brother. Despite everything, seeing him broken stirred something. We brought him inside, gave him ice for his face. He explained he'd been hiding in his car, too scared to rent a room. The creditors had found him 3 times now, each beating worse than the last. He pulled out a crumpled envelope. Inside, $3,000 cash. He'd sold everything. His car, his phone, even donated plasma. It wasn't close to what he owed me, but it was a start. My wife counted the money while I watched him. He looked smaller somehow, deflated. The cocky manipulator who drugged me and stolen my credit card was gone. In his place sat someone desperate and afraid. He asked to use our phone to call our parents. I supervised while he explained everything. The gambling addiction, the debts, the theft from me. Our mother cried. Our father stayed silent. They offered to mortgage their house to pay his debts. I grabbed the phone, told them absolutely not. They'd enabled him our entire childhood. Bailing him out now would teach him nothing. If they wanted to help, they could support his recovery, not his debts. The argument that followed was familiar. Old patterns reasserting themselves. Me painted as heartless. Him as the victim of circumstances. I hung up and handed him back the $3,000. He stared at the money, confused. I explained he needed it more than I did right now. Use it to get somewhere safe, get clean, start over. But the website stayed up until he paid back everything. And if he ever contacted me again before making things right, I'd share the website with every employer, landlord, and dating app match for the rest of his life. My wife drove him to a bus station while I stayed with Victoria. She didn't say much during the ride, later telling me he'd spent it writing a letter. She'd watched him struggle with the words, crossing out lines, starting over. When she returned, she handed me the letter. I didn't open it. Not yet. Instead, we focused on practical matters. The creditors were still out there. We needed to ensure our safety. The next day, I met with the other victims again. Benji had researched our options. Small claims court was possible, but would take months. Public shame through the website was working, but slowly. We needed a new approach. That's when Benji suggested something brilliant. What if we created a formal registry? A place where people could report financial betrayals by family members. Not for legal action, but for awareness. Future employers, landlords, and lenders could check it. We spent the next week building it. Simple, clean, factual. Each entry required documentation. No editorializing, just facts. We called it the Family Fraud Registry. My brother's entry was the first, complete with police report numbers, bank statements, and victim testimonials. Within days, we had dozens of submissions. Apparently, family financial abuse was more common than we'd thought. The threatening messages stopped abruptly. Maybe the creditors had given up, or maybe they'd found my brother. I tried not to think about which. We moved back home, installed security cameras, and tried to return to normal. But normal was different now. I'd learned to check my wallet, guard my financial information, question generous offers. Trust, once broken, left scars. 2 weeks later, a package arrived. No return address. Inside, $2,000 in mixed bills and a flash drive. The drive contained a single video file. My brother, sitting in what looked like a treatment facility. He explained he'd checked himself into a gambling addiction program. The money was from selling his remaining possessions. He promised more would come as he worked through the program and found employment. He talked about our childhood, acknowledging the lies he'd told, the pain he'd caused. He admitted to stealing from our parents too, small amounts over the years. He'd already called them to confess and arrange repayment. The video ended with him saying he understood if I never forgave him. He just wanted me to know he was trying to change, that the website had been a wake-up call. Rock bottom, but necessary. My wife watched the video with me. We sat in silence afterward, processing. She asked what I wanted to do. I honestly didn't know. The Family Fraud Registry was gaining traction. News blogs had picked it up, calling it a grassroots solution to family financial abuse. Benji was fielding interview requests. Other victims were finding closure through documentation. But I kept thinking about that video. My brother in treatment, finally facing his demons. It didn't erase what he'd done, but it was a step. I updated his entry on the registry, added a note about him entering treatment, the partial repayment, facts only, no judgment. Let future people make their own decisions. The other victims had mixed reactions. Some thought I was too soft. Others understood the complexity of family. The brother shows up beaten and desperate with $3,000. This whole situation feels carefully orchestrated somehow. Why would dangerous creditors suddenly stop threatening them right after they refuse to help collect debts? Benji pointed out that showing consequences could lead to redemption, gave the registry more credibility. A month passed. My brother stayed in treatment. No contact, as I demanded. But the facility sent updates. He was attending meetings, participating in therapy, working kitchen duty to contribute to his stay. The creditors never resurfaced. I suspected they'd written off the debt, moved on to easier targets. Or maybe my brother had worked something out. I didn't ask. Then came an unexpected call. A woman named Vida said she'd seen the registry. Her brother had stolen her identity, racked up $30,000 in debt. She wanted advice, support, someone who understood. I spent an hour on the phone with her, sharing what I'd learned. Document everything, set boundaries, don't enable, consider the registry, find other victims. Most importantly, don't blame yourself for trusting family. More calls followed. The registry had become something bigger than we'd intended, a support network for people betrayed by those closest to them. We started hosting online meetings, sharing resources, building community from shared pain. My brother completed 60 days of treatment. The facility called to verify his aftercare plan. He'd arranged to live in a sober house, found a job at a warehouse. He was required to attend daily meetings, submit to substance tests, save 60% of his earnings for debt repayment. They asked if I wanted to participate in his family therapy session. I declined. Not yet, maybe not ever. Some wounds needed more time, but I did update the registry again, noted his progress, his commitment to repayment. Several users criticized me for being too forgiving. Others shared their own stories of family members who'd changed. The $3,000 he'd initially given me sat in an envelope in our safe. My wife suggested donating it to the treatment facility. I had a different idea. What if we used it to help other victims? A small fund for people who'd lost everything to family fraud. We announced it on the registry, the Family Fraud Recovery Fund. Within a week, others had contributed. Victims who'd recovered money paying it forward. Soon we had enough to help Vida with legal fees to clear her credit. My brother heard about the fund somehow. Through his counselor, he sent a message. He wanted to contribute his first paycheck when he started working. Use the money he'd stolen to help others who'd been stolen from. I sat with that request for days. Was it genuine remorse or another manipulation? My wife thought it was genuine. The old him would have kept the money, not offered it freely. In the end, I agreed, but with conditions. Every payment had to go through the facility's accounting, full transparency, and he couldn't use it for good publicity or registry removal. This was about restitution, not reputation. The first payment arrived 2 weeks later. $500 with a note from the facility confirming it was 60% of his earnings. He was living on $200 a week, saving the rest for debts. I updated the registry one more time. Payments being made, slow progress, but progress nonetheless. The comment section exploded with debate. Some saw hope, others warned about trusting too easily. But I realized something important. The registry wasn't just about warning others anymore. It had become a record of accountability. Some people stayed on it forever, unrepentant. Others, like my brother, might earn a different notation. Not forgiveness, but acknowledgement of effort. 3 months into his recovery, my brother had repaid $2,000 more. Still far from the $7,000 stolen, but consistent. He'd also started repaying the other victims, small amounts to each. The threatening creditors never returned. I learned later through Benji's legal contacts that they'd been arrested for extortion in an unrelated case. My brother's debt to them became moot when they went to prison. The registry grew to over 1,000 entries. We'd partnered with financial counselors to provide resources. Support groups formed in major cities. What started as revenge had evolved into something constructive. My wife and I slowly rebuilt our financial security. The experience had changed us, made us more cautious but also more aware of others' struggles. We volunteered with the registry, helping new victims navigate their pain. 6 months after the theft, I finally opened my brother's letter from the bus station. His handwriting was shaky, words crossed out and rewritten. He'd listed every theft he could remember, going back to childhood. Tiny amounts I'd forgotten, building to the massive betrayal. At the bottom, he'd written something that surprised me. He thanked me for the website, said it had forced him to face what he'd become. Without consequences, he'd have kept spiraling until someone called him or he called himself. I showed the letter to my wife. She asked if I believed him. I honestly wasn't sure, but I was starting to think it didn't matter. His actions moving forward would tell the truth, not his words. The registry notification system alerted me to an update on his entry. Another victim had posted, but instead of a complaint, it was a confirmation. He'd contacted them, arranged a payment plan, stuck to it for 3 months. Slowly, his entry was becoming less warning and more documentation of change. Each payment recorded, each milestone noted. It would never erase the original theft, but it was building a new narrative. My parents called occasionally, updating me on his progress. He'd been helping them around the house, fixing things he'd broken years ago. Small gestures, but consistent. They wanted us to reconcile, but I held firm. Not until every debt was paid. The 1-year anniversary of the theft approached. By my calculations, he'd repaid about 60% of what he'd stolen from me, plus smaller amounts to others. At his current rate, full restitution would take another 8 months. I found myself checking the registry less often. The acute pain had faded to a dull ache. Trust would never fully return, but the active anger was gone. My wife and I were stronger for having weathered it together. The family fraud registry had helped hundreds of people. Some found justice, others found closure, many found community. It wasn't the outcome I'd expected when I'd built that first simple website, but it was better. As I prepared for bed one night, my wife asked a question that had been hanging between us. What would I do when he'd paid everything back? Would I take down the website, remove his entry from the registry? I thought about it seriously. The website had served its purpose. He'd faced consequences, was making amends, but taking it down felt wrong too. It was part of the story now, the catalyst for change. In the end, I decided the entry would stay, but evolve. A complete record. The theft, the consequences, the recovery. Let others see that accountability was possible. That broken trust could lead to growth, even if it could never be fully repaired. My brother was now 10 months into recovery, 8 months into repayment. He'd found better work, increased his payments. The other victims reported regular deposits. He'd even started speaking at addiction meetings about financial crimes and family betrayal. I watched from a distance as he rebuilt his life. No direct contact, as promised. But the registry updates told a story of consistency. Every 2 weeks, another payment. Every month, another milestone in recovery. The threats that had once terrified us seemed like ancient history. Our security cameras recorded nothing but delivery drivers and neighborhood cats. Life had returned to a new kind of normal. The registry alert came through at 2 a.m. My brother had made another payment, but this one was different. $5,000 in a single transfer. I sat up in bed, checking the timestamp. The facility's accounting department had verified it came from legitimate employment earnings he'd saved over months. My wife stirred beside me, glancing at my phone screen. She did the math quickly. With this payment, he'd repaid everything. $7,300 plus interest I'd never asked for. The debt was cleared. I couldn't sleep after that. Downstairs, I made coffee and opened my laptop. The registry showed his complete payment history. 18 months of consistent deposits. Not just to me, but to every victim we'd identified. His entry had transformed from a warning to a redemption story. What a ride it's been today. I've really enjoyed digging into all these questions with you. Thanks for letting me wonder out loud right alongside you. Like the video. It helps more than you think.